My name is Hannah Leonard, and I'm physically based in Missoula, Montana, and I work for an organization called Sporting Lead Free. I'm the program director there, which essentially means I have my hand in like 8 different buckets at all times. So I manage all of our outreach efforts, our website, our event coordination, social media, emails, all of the above. So it's a pretty awesome job. I've been with it for almost 3 years. So, and I'll kind of explain how I got into this role. But my background, my undergrad is in marketing, and then my master's was in resource conservation. And I actually didn't start hunting until graduate school. I started fishing. Well, when I was really, really little, my mom got me a Tweety bird rod and tackle box, and I used to fish in my dad's sailboat marina, which sounds glamorous, but it wasn't. The perch were full of gasoline and such from the sailboats. But anyway, then I started fly fishing in college and kind of got the bug, the sporting bug from there. So let's dive right in. We'll see if I can get this to go. So just to give everyone kind of where we're going to go tonight, and I'll try to keep it brief because I could talk about this all day. So just like, everyone start yelling at me if you're like, I'm falling asleep, and I can move things along. But anyway, so I'll start with how I got into this, and then how Sporting Lead Free
Hi, how you doing?
is what it is, and then how to help everyone kind of make that switch. And I will probably have some dogs, I guess, barking in the background too. Apologies. So my story, like I said, I didn't start hunting until college and until grad school. And I had heard a little bit about lead free in a presentation in a class, but I didn't really know too much more other than, hunting in general used ammunition, and that was about it. Hang on, let me yell at my dog. Her name's Avocado. That's a whole other story. Anyway, so I was hunting with a family friend, and we were hunting for moose for him and trying to fill my whitetail tag at the same time. And we were on a block management area in Montana, which is a private parcel that is allowed for public access from landowners to hunters during the hunting season. And we came over this edge, this coulee, and I saw this on the ground. And I hope that played for everyone. So what you're seeing here is an adult golden eagle. And I don't have a background in wildlife, but I love animals. And I know enough that this animal was not healthy. And luckily for me, my neighbor at the time worked at our local raptor rehab facility. So she told me how to capture this giant raptor safely and get it to the rehab. So we put it in a dog kennel and brought it to the rehab, Wild Skies Raptor Rescue, if anyone's familiar with that. And the gal called me later and she said, well, this bird has lead poisoning. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. These birds aren't licking paint off barns. They're not huffing gasoline from old tractors. And she said, no. It's from gut piles from hunters who used a lead bullet. And my heart sank. At the time, I had a lead bullet chambered in my rifle. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to quit hunting right now. I had no idea that this was something that could happen. And so she promptly calmed me down from my existential crisis and said, no, just switch to a lead-free bullet. And so at that point, I started doing research on lead-free alternatives. I met a local researcher here who was doing research on lead ingestion in raptors from hunting. And him and I kept in touch throughout my finishing of grad school. And then like any grad student does when they finish school, they're completely poor and dying to have a job. So I sent out a big email to everyone in my network saying, someone please hire me. And he knew a colleague down in Wyoming who was starting this initiative called Sporting Lead Free. So that's when that was born. And Sporting Lead Free's mission is to encourage the use of lead-free ammunition and tackle in the field and promote the conservation ethics of our sporting communities. So our founder, his background is in fact in bird biology, ornithology. He's a bird biologist by trade, and he's also a hunter. And he studied how lead was impacting species such as golden eagles, bald eagles, and then ravens as well. And he did the thing where you publish the data as a scientist, you wipe your hands clean, you say, hey, done my job, things are going to change now, this is great, moving forward. 15 years later, the conversations were still happening, and he was like, nope, not okay. And he started sporting lead free. And I was already that weird person in my friend group that was trying to get all of my friends to switch to lead free. And with my background in marketing and then my focus in grad school being in human dimensions of natural resources, it was a really awesome pairing for me. And so I've been spewing lead free ever since then. So I'll kind of try to do a brief overview, and I promise not all my slides are going to look horrendous like this, but there's three big tenets in sporting lead free as to why we are what we are. The first one is wildlife and human health. We have overwhelming scientific data that lead-based ammunition and tackle has been linked to a lot of health issues with wildlife across the globe. It can also come into the game meat that we bring home to our families, which I'll explain in more detail later. The other thing we catch on is performance. With lead-free ammunition, specifically centerfire ammunition, you've got high weight retention, deep penetration, less meat loss, and then, of course, no harm to non-target species and clean meat for our families. In fishing, there are awesome alternatives such as smaller profile lures for high-pressure fishing areas. Again, no harm, if you lose a lure that is lead-free, you're not going to cause an issue for other wildlife. And then thirdly, we talk about our sporting heritage. As you all know, and as we all know as ambassadors, our hunting and angling heritage is constantly, I don't want to say constantly, that kind of sounds drab, but it's under attack a lot from people who don't quite understand the culture, don't understand the importance of hunting and angling. And a lot of people, if they hear that hunters and anglers are out here, poisoning eagles and loons and bringing home lead to our kiddos, like that's a bad look for hunting. That's a bad PR day for hunting. And so we really think that informing people on switching to lead-free alternatives is an awesome way to support our hunting heritage going forward. And we want to lead by example. So I'll go through quickly, just in case people are like, what? I've never heard of this issue before. Don't worry. That's my job. A lot of people don't know about this. We don't learn about this in hunter ed for the most part. So I'm just going to go through these pathways to exposure. So at Sporting Lead Free, we talk about big game environment hunting, angling, both spin fishing, ice fishing, and fly fishing, and then upland hunting as well. So any sporting activity that brings lead into the environment, into wildlife, we talk about it. So for center fire and rim fire ammunition, a hunter takes an animal. That lead bullet breaks into these tiny, tiny fragments. These are x-rays of animals. The top one is a white-tailed deer. The bottom one there is a prairie dog. And those white dots in the x-ray, they might be hard to see depending on your screen. Those are all tiny, tiny lead fragments. Usually we leave the guts in the field. I do like to take the liver and the heart and the lungs and the esophagus to make dog treats. And then for varmint hunting, typically, if people are doing it from like a pest control standpoint, they're not going to go out there and collect the prairie dogs, because most people who are doing that sort of, I'm doing air quotes, varmint hunting, they're not eating them, unfortunately. But we have other creatures out there in the world that do love to eat those gut piles. So hunters can provide this awesome resource to our scavenging species like eagles and ravens and coyotes and that sort of thing in the form of gut piles. However, if there is a lead fragment in it, that's bad news for these birds. So they'll ingest it and then they get lead poisoning. We'll talk about more of those effects in a second. This is an x-ray. Well, on the left of your screen, the top is a copper bullet that we shot into a water tank. And then the bottom there is a lead bullet we shot into a water tank and collected all the fragments. And then to the right of your screen, these are ballistics gels. So ballistics gels are these like giant chunks of jello essentially that mimic soft tissue. So the FBI uses this to, work on ballistics on bullet trajectory and training their officers. We use the same kind of stuff in the field during shooting demonstrations. So this top one we shot with copper. It looks like nothing is there because there's no metal left behind. Sometimes a petal might come off that copper bullet, but copper isn't toxic like lead is. So if we ingest that, if an animal ingests that, they're going to be all right. Whereas this bottom one, we shot with a lead bullet and x-rayed it. You can see all that white dust in there. That's all lead fragments. Tiny, tiny pieces, hundreds, if not thousands of pieces. It's crazy how much there is when your bullet breaks apart. And we'll get back to kind of more nuances there too. Another way of exposure to lead is from our upland hunting activities. So we have two different things I talk about. Crippled birds. We've all had that moment where we've shot a bird. We know a pellet hit it and it just didn't go down. And we try hard to find it. Our dogs go to try to find it. And maybe it, if it's a pheasant, ran off, and like they run so crazy and so far. I just went chukar hunting last week and they're like the same thing. They're crazy. They disappear. They're ghost birds. Anyway, if you used a lead shell, that pellet is now embedded in that animal, that bird, and other predators like goshawks and eagles, they're going to come down and they're going to say, hey, that's easy prey. That's wounded prey. They're going to eat it. They're not going to look and see what they're eating. They're going to unintentionally ingest a lead pellet. And that's bad news for them. The second way is we call it grit pickers. That's not a scientific term by any means. If anyone has backyard chickens, you know that they pick up grit off the ground. That helps in their digestion. They pick up pebbles and stones to use in their gizzard to grind their food down. Game birds such as pheasants, grouse, except sage grouse, doves, quail, they all pick up grit to aid in their digestion. They're not going to know the difference between spent shot and lead pellets. So again, those game birds themselves will get lead poisoning, become easy prey for birds of prey, and then those birds of prey will then ingest that lead. So that picture there, it's a bald eagle with a pheasant, which is badass. Unfortunately, then that x-ray is of a bald eagle that ingested a pheasant or a game bird that had lead shot. And you can tell that bald eagle x-ray wasn't shot by that because that density of pellets would just like be insanely impossible to shoot a bird like that. So that was from it actually eating those pellets. And in fishing, we've got lost tackle. We've all lost tackle at the bottom of the waterways. Unfortunately, water birds like swans and ducks, they dive down, they pick up grit just like our backyard chickens do, but they're underwater. And they don't know the difference between, our split shot weights, our jig heads. They're going to pick it up. They're going to get lead poisoning from that. Same deal with swim away tackle. If you've got that big, fish on the line and your line breaks, that fish is now swimming around with a piece of lead in it. Birds like loons swallow fish in their entirety. Crazy to me. Big raptors such as bald eagles, they take huge chunks out and they're going to ingest that lure, that split shot in its whole, and they're not going to know the difference. They're going to get lead poisoning. So the scale of this issue is pretty huge. Over 130 species of animals are affected by lead. So that's not only avian species. We just focus on avian species that's boarding lead free because they're the ones that are the most sensitive as far as the scientific studies have gone because of what they're eating. There's also studies done on like turtles, salamanders, coyotes, bears, you name it. We too are affected by lead. And there's estimates out there that 20 million animals die from lead poisoning effects each year, which is a lot. So as far as distribution goes, if I were to shoot an animal, a deer, with a lead bullet, and I shot it and I couldn't recover it, there's going to be about 551 fragments of lead in that whole carcass. Now, if I gut that animal out and I leave the guts in the field, there's an average of 160 lead fragments left in the field. And I need to add a little note here because science has improved, as we know, as it does. When this study was done, these fragments were counted just with the human eye. So someone literally took this x-ray and had a poor grad student sit there and count each and every one of these fragments on, I believe this study included like 30 deer or something like that. It was done in Wyoming. Anyway, so that's visible fragments. There is a new study out there where they're using a CAT scan and an MRI machine, and they're using AI to actually cut a chunk out of the image and then count all of the lead fragments in there. And it's thousands of fragments, which is crazy. And the little dust particulate is a lot more dangerous than a big chunk of lead, and I'll talk about that in a second. It only takes 20 milligrams of lead to kill an adult bald eagle. 20 milligrams, if somebody were to ask you like what that looked like, it's about the size of a small grain of rice, and it's the weight of a ladybug. If a ladybug lands on your body, you're not going to feel it, right? You usually feel it when it's like crawling around, and you're like, ah, and then you're like, oh, it's a ladybug. You don't really feel it. It's nothing. It's pretty weightless. That's enough to kill a bald eagle, which is nuts. So when you think about how many of those little fragments, tiny grains of rice are left in a gut pile or left in a varmint, that's a lot of chances for a lot of bad days for our avian scavengers. In New Hampshire, there was a study done, I think the years were between, I want to say it was like 1989 to 2012. All of the loon mortalities, 48% of them were directly related to ingesting lead fishing tackle. So in New Hampshire and in a lot of other northeastern states, there are regulations now about fishing tackle because of that study. This is the only graph I'm going to show you all night, so bear with me. So as I was telling you, our founder, he's a raptor biologist by trade. So he's based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And if any of you have been there before, there's the National Elk Refuge there where hundreds of elk come in there for winter range. In the fall, there is a hunting season on the refuge. So what he did is he kind of took a key in from California. California condors were the first species that we started really focusing in on getting lead poisoning from hunter harvested gut piles from lead ammunition. And he was like, I wonder if the same thing is happening in Wyoming with eagles and ravens. Well, I guess he first started with ravens. But anyway, no one really cared about ravens. So then he pivoted and started catching bald eagles and golden eagles. Ravens are really cool, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't love them. Anyway, so what he did is he captured eagles throughout the year, and he took blood samples and he ran them in a blood testing machine to get their blood lead level. And he saw this, like pointing as if you can see like what I'm pointing at. The orange column is the hunting season. So you can see the eagles that he caught during that time period had a much more elevated blood lead levels. The following couple of years, he actually handed out lead-free ammunition to hunters that were on the refuge. And the percentage of hunters who were successful with lead-free ammunition correlated to that same percentage drop. I think it was like 28% of hunters were successful, and there was a 28% drop in blood lead levels in these eagles that he was capturing. So to him, that says it's obviously related to ammunition, and it can also be fixed with ammunition, which is really cool. That's really unusual in science to have that kind of one-to-one correlation. So why are birds so affected? Why are we talking about birds so much? Many raptors feed on gut piles as a food source. They're also migrating a lot during the hunting season. So for example, right now we're at the very tail end of golden eagle migration, and 98% of eagles captured during migration have blood lead levels that are detectable. And a lot of that is because as they're migrating, they're seeing gut piles that are left behind by hunters. They're like, sweet, I'm out of energy. I don't want to hunt. I'm going to eat that little pile there. And then they get sick. They get lead poisoning. Birds have extremely acidic digestive systems. If I hold a piece of lead in my hand, I might get a little bit of surface absorption. But as soon as I hit that with an acid, that breaks down and becomes readily available into my bloodstream. So just like our stomach acids, bird stomach acids, the same thing. It's going to start absorbing that lead into their bloodstream. And as I was talking about too, their gizzard, that grinding mechanism, they might pick up a fragment that's, not quite 20 milligrams, but then that grinding mechanism of their gizzard is going to break down that lead even more, break it into tinier pieces. And those tiny pieces are much more easily absorbed into the bloodstream. Think about like surface area. There's more surface area on a tiny, tiny thing than there is on like a big block of something. So as we absorb lead, just birds and humans as well, except we don't have feathers, lead gets stored in the liver, kidney, brain, bones, and growing feathers. So it sticks with them for life. So it accumulates over time. And same thing with humans. It's not like, when we eat some bad food and then we, puke it up and have food poisoning, then we're good and we're ready to go the next day. Lead will stick with you for life, and it's stored in those organs. So what does it look like for birds? Clenched talons, weakness, muscle wasting, emaciation, wing droop, blindness, head tremors, green diarrhea, crop stasis, seizures, regurgitation, and death. This is like one of those commercials where people are like running and like happy and like, this drug is great, but it causes all these things, right? It's super, super sad to see this. When I grabbed the eagle up that I found hunting, I thought it was electrocuted. Its talons were clenched, its wings were drooping. I had no idea. Now knowing that, I'm like, obviously it had lead poisoning. It was super emaciated. It hadn't been able to eat. It hadn't been able to hunt for itself. And that eagle that I found did end up passing away 3 days later, unfortunately, from lead poisoning. So there are treatments for lead poisoning. It's the same thing for humans. If we ever are exposed to lead and need to be treated for it, it's called chelation. It's very similar to chemotherapy, where you're injected with a toxin and that binds with the lead and it scrubs it out of your blood. It's super tough. So raptors are given this treatment twice a day for 5 days, then rest for 2 days, then repeat the treatment for 5 more days. It's really common for birds to die during treatment due to these complications of them already being emaciated. They're usually in a raptor rehab facility because they got hit by a car or ran into a window, or, you know, some person out hunting randomly found them. A lot of times they have secondary injuries that are caused from them being disoriented from the lead poisoning. This is a really cool story at Teton Raptor Center. They had a golden eagle come in that had, I believe this one had a broken wing. This one I showed you, this is a juvenile bald eagle. This is a golden eagle. Anyway, so it had lead and it was already in its stomach, in its GI tract, which usually by the time lead is there, you can do chelation, and depending on other injuries, they may or may not make it. The rehabbers there were able to make this crazy concoction of like honey, Epsom salts, and some other stuff, and were able to congeal everything that was in that bird's stomach and get it to regurgitate. That's what this giant turd is. Just like owls, eagles also cast up pellets, except instead of being like owl pellet size, they are eagle size. They're like literally the size of a turd. And all of those white dots are the lead fragments that were in its GI tract. This bird still had to go through chelation because it had already absorbed a lot of that lead and was showing clinical signs of lead poisoning. However, the fact that they were able to get this lead out was awesome and really gave this bird a chance, and it actually survived, which is amazing. So then it was re-released down into Evanston, Wyoming, if anyone's familiar with that area. We put a little backpack transmitter on it, and he is still going strong. With the slow-mo video, it sounds like an alien attack. Sorry if that was super loud on anyone's end. Yeah, so that's a happy story. But just like any sick animal, most of the time when we're sick, we don't want to be around anyone. Wildlife is the same way. So it's really unusual or rare for these birds to come in to rehab centers. So it's actually really hard to know how many birds are fully impacted by lead. We just know from a population level, from capturing them during migration season, that those birds, 98% of them have background lead levels, which is a lot. So I talked about kind of our human health side of things too, and bringing home lead in our meat. So there is lead that can come into our game meat. And I don't want to freak anyone out. There have been studies done that show 7 to 21% of packaged meat harvested with lead bullets can contain fragments of lead. In Jackson, Wyoming, we actually x-ray all of the game meat that's donated to our local food pantry. And in our scanning, this is what we've found as far as percentages. So 18.69% of ground meat packages had a lead fragment, 1.2 of steaks, 2.6 of roast, and then 15.3 of jerky, snack sticks, a heart, that sort of thing. So like I said earlier too, lead is pretty stable in its form, its solid form in our hand. As soon as we expose it to our stomach acid, or say an acid in a marinade, it can again leach out into that meat. So if you're like my dad and you're really bad at cleaning birds, and up until a couple of years ago hadn't been able to convince him to switch to lead-free, You're chomping on a pheasant he shot and didn't clean very well. And you say, oh, aha, that's so funny. I almost broke my tooth on that piece of lead. You might spit it out and that's great. There's still a chance that that lead leached into the rest of the meat. So if you put it in a pot of chili, that sort of thing, like any marinade, any acid, has that potential to leak out that lead in it. There was a guy that didn't know about this, and he had made, I believe it was elk burgers, and he went to microwave, leftover elk burger, and his microwave started sparking. And then he dug through the burger meat and he found the lead fragment, was like, whoa, I had no idea. So the same thing could happen with copper, as far as like a little tiny, fragment of copper, but typically the petals that come off of copper are very visible. And you can, feel that, whereas lead is so small, it's going to be really hard to find and get it all out. So that's why we x-ray it. None of the meat that we x-ray that has lead in it is wasted. There's a contingency of gentlemen in Jackson Hole that don't care about the lead being in there. They are just happy to have meat. And that's great. We don't want any of it to go to waste. And that's their informed choice. So we know that lead consumption has adverse effects on humans. While a grown adult has little risk from occasional lead ingestion, there's no known safe level of lead from the CDC or the World Health Organization. So that is essentially like in our food world, there's a certain percentage of rat poop that's okay to have in our food. There's no known safe level of lead in our food. Pregnant women and children under 6 in particular should be notified or are cautious in eating any game meat that was harvested with a lead bullet. Just like, we don't want to eat a whole bunch of sushi when we're pregnant, kind of in that same line. We don't want to unintentionally ingest toxins for developing kiddos. The good-ish news is that there's no study that directly correlates consumption of lead game meat with developmental issues. There will never be a study that does that, because we're never going to intentionally feed kids meat with lead in it to see what happens. So a lot of people will be like, oh, you're, out here fear mongering. I don't want people to be freaked out or scared. If you eat game meat with lead in it, you're going to be fine. It's just another thing to know. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, the CDC doesn't say anything about it. And just like I said, that they're not ever going to do a study that feeds kids leaded game meat. That would be horrible. We just know that that's a vector of lead into our world. And so the more we know, the more we can make decisions to not have those impacts. Okay, so for advantages, and all of this is also available on my website. So if you did fall asleep, don't worry. You can find all of this information on the sportingleadfree.org website. So as far as performance advantages go with centerfire ammunition, there's less meat loss, and that's because you're not getting that fragmentation that spreads throughout that chest cavity. So if anyone's shot with a copper bullet, you see that a lot of times it almost looks like as the bullet goes through, it like cauterized it. My ex-boyfriend didn't believe me that copper was cool. And we shot our deer a couple days apart from each other. We were processing it in the garage, and he knows I'm pretty particular in OCD, and I wasn't throwing anything out. And he was like, what are you doing? Like, I know you're crazy, but not that crazy. I said, well, come look at my deer. And he was like, holy moly, you have no meat loss. And I just lost my entire front shoulder because I shot it with a lead bullet. And I was like, yep, copper. And then he switched, which was great. So hopefully he still is going to hunt with lead free now that we're not together anymore. But also from like a ballistic standpoint, copper bullets usually retain 90 to 99% of their weight, which means they have that force to move through that animal. They're a lighter, faster, flatter flying bullet. And they can pierce through hides like boar, bear, and moose. And again, that's because that weight retention. And they're reliably lethal when shot opportunity is less than ideal. So the gentlemen at Hornady Bullets were asked, when would we use our copper bullets over our lead bullets? And the engineer said, well, I have a lot of money invested into a hunt, and I know it's going to be a one-shot kind of opportunity. I'm going to use the copper bullet because I know that that bullet is going to perform when I would be a little bit concerned that the lead bullet may not perform. For shotgun, copper-plated bismuth from a company called Boss Shot Shells. They're one of our conservation partners. They're amazing. It carries a lead-like punch without leaving any lead in our landscape. Tungsten, which is an alternative, is denser than lead, so it actually is more lethal than lead. I would recommend that for turkey hunting and not any upland hunting, because you're going to really break the bank with that. And then bismuth is a lead-free alternative that we can use with our old shotguns. So steel is also a lead-free alternative, but you can't shoot steel through old shotguns. It will ruin the barrel. You can shoot bismuth, which is awesome. So if you were handed down a shotgun from a grandparent and you're like, man, I want to use this, but I can't because I don't want to shoot lead, bismuth is your way to go, or the copper-plated bismuth from Boss as well. Tackle, there's many materials that are harder than lead that make it less likely to get hung up on rocks and sand and whatever else at the bottom of our lakes, rivers, and ponds. Smaller profiles with denser materials like tungsten yields more success in high pressure fishing areas. So if your buddy has something on, he's not catching anything, you can put on your tungsten jig head. It's a little bit smaller, and I bet you're going to catch more fish than them. And overall, changing to these lead-free alternatives ensures that our non-target species aren't unintentionally ingesting lead. And we know that the bounty we bring home to our families is lead-free, which is great. Love that. There are awesome lead-free alternatives out there for fishing. It's tungsten, steel, glass, clay. Fishing has a huge list of them. For big game hunting, copper is the king. There are some tin bullets out there. I don't know quite how I feel about those. We've shot them at the range, and performance-wise at the range, they've been great. I haven't shot them in an animal, so I can't say from personal experience there, but they are rated for a medium-sized game. For upland and turkey hunting, there's bismuth, steel, copper-plated bismuth, and tungsten. And then for rimfire, there's both frangible copper, copper alloy, and then solid copper. So what about our sporting heritage? So like I said earlier, we know what to do. So at Sporting Lead Free, our goal is to eliminate the push for mandates and maintain our hunting heritage while ensuring healthy wildlife populations and healthy food on the table. We want to set the example, and we want to continue the legacy of conservation. So we are a non-regulatory, non-legislative organization. You will not see us ever lobbying for something. I did actually just comment today in Idaho, they're asking for comments on making the muzzleloader season available for non-lead alternatives, which at the moment you can't shoot during the muzzleloader season with lead-free. So that's kind of an example of not necessarily legislating, but just saying, hey, I would love for hunters to have more of a choice. But you'll never see us signing anything about banning or mandating a ban for lead. And I can answer questions about that too, if anyone's curious. But we just firmly believe in education is the way to do this. People don't like being told what to do. And most often, once you're given information, you make a good choice. So real quickly, how to switch for center fire. Clean your rifle. You don't want any lead residue in your barrel before you start switching to a copper bullet, and that's just to increase your performance right out the bat. You typically want to reduce your grain weight in a bullet, and I know for people who are really into ballistics that seems really scary, but like I said earlier, copper retains 90 to 99% of its weight, so you're not losing that weight in those fragments, so you get to drop down a grain weight and have awesome performance, and again, that faster, flatter flying bullet. And a lot of that is because copper is less dense than lead, and so in order to get the same twist rate or the same velocity in your barrel, they had to make the bullet longer. But if you want it to perform similarly to your lead bullet, you need to drop in grain weight to get the height of the bullet more similar in performance. And with anything, sight it in, whether you're switching from lead to lead or lead to copper, sight it in. And try different brands. Just like our feet, every rifle has a preference. So my rifle prefers Barnes and Federal over Hornady. Other people's rifles will be a little bit different. I know that that's frustrating, especially given the expense and availability of ammo in past years. It's getting better, which is great. But if you have a friend with the same caliber, each of you get, a different brand and try it out and see whose rifle likes what best. It's a great fun activity to do at the range with your friends. And then shot placement, again, because copper retains its weight and it's that solid mass, you can actually get away with those kind of like, I don't want to say sketchy, but maybe like quartering away and like potentially nicking that shoulder blade. It's going to punch through that bone and not immediately fall apart like lead would. For shotguns, know what your shotgun can and cannot shoot. Like I said, those older shotguns cannot shoot steel. If you are unsure on how to tell that on your shotgun barrel, Google's your friend, but also double check with a gunsmith, because we don't want you to damage your firearm or yourself. So know what your gun can and cannot shoot. Pattern your shotgun. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. A lot of people don't pattern their shotgun or don't know how to do it. It's very similar. When we get a rifle, you have to sight your rifle in. You need to also pattern your shotgun to see what is happening downrange. We have a step-by-step guide on how to do that on our website as well. And then familiarize yourself with the lead-free alternatives and the best applications for both. Like I said, you're not necessarily going to want to shoot tungsten at doves. You won't have any dove left. But bismuth is a great alternative for that. Oops, and this meant to say tackle at the top. So with tackle, start replacing items like split shot and jig heads. It doesn't have to be all at once. I know it's really expensive to replace an entire tackle box. So just do it, one item at a time. We all love going shopping at sporting goods stores. So, grab a package of lead-free tackle next time you're in there. If you tie your own flies, consider using lead-free wire. I didn't know this until I started tying my own flies, that a lot of streamers and nymphs actually have lead wire under the feathers and fur. So now that I tie my own, not that I need any more expensive hobbies, that's what I do, is lead-free wire. And then consider lead sinkers, jigs, and wire, all of that, like any other household toxic substance. So call up your local waste disposal company and ask them if they have ways for you to dispose of tackle. For guns, I should have mentioned this earlier. If you're like, oh my God, I have all these boxes of ammunition that's lead, what do I do? I still shoot lead at the range. When I go trap shooting with my dad, I'm still shooting lead shells, because I'm not shooting at an animal. Most of these ranges, you're not going to see any birds picking up grit, because they're either all going to be shot or they're terrified because there's guns going off all the time anyway. So the likelihood of animals getting exposed to lead from ranges is a lot less than it is when we're out there in the field. So, use your lead center fire ammunition to get used to your rifle, get, that trigger practice. And then when you're ready to sight in and get ready for the field, follow in those how to switch steps. Okay, so what can you do? We have a membership program. You can become a member, and essentially what that does is say, hey, I like what you guys are doing, keep it up. It helps us. We're, fully grant funded. So it helps us show our grantors that people actually care about this. We're not just hiding in the woodwork. There's people who are out there making this something important in their life. Talk to your friends and family about, what you learned and how to get them involved. Show them, the website and our resources. Like us on social media. If you're feeling generous, donate to help us continue doing our work. And then when you go to your local sporting goods store, ask them about lead-free ammunition and tackle. A lot of people will say, well, they don't have it at my local sporting goods store. And a lot of that is because as consumers, we have to drive that demand. And so start asking for that, start doing it. If you live in a state that allows you to buy ammunition online, awesome. There's a lot of lead-free ammunition online. If you're a reloader, there's even more options, all kinds of good stuff. Reach out and learn more. We just updated our website, so check it out. It's sportingleadfree.org. And with that, sorry, I tried to make it fast because I know everyone's wanting to socialize, but here you go.